Everyone is seated. All right. Well, welcome to this interview event with Larry Lombard. So there's kind of two things that I wanted to accomplish today. So one is that I wanted to start this series of just kind of interviews with faculty to give people, students, a chance to get to know their instructors better, but also like a chance to get to know our colleagues a little better. I mean, I find that although I've been around Larry for 10 years, there's a lot about his life that I don't know that I'm interested in. And the same goes for many of my other colleagues. So I just kind of want to give us a chance to get to know the people that were around all the time. And I thought that Larry would be a great sort of inaugural interviewee because, first of all, this is his final year at Wayne State after, is this your 54th year? 54 years.
Larry started when I was 8.
Larry has been, you know, the heart and soul of this department for as long as I've been here and for many years before that, I'm sure. And not only that, but really part of the heart and soul of Wayne State University. There's nowhere I go on campus where people don't know who Larry is. He's still, even in this 54th year of his time here, serves on university committees and is very active. Like, people know Larry. So I'm really honored I've gotten to share this first 10 years at Wayne with you, and excited to interview you. So I'm going to go through some sort of like, I've sort of broken up some questions into sort of like childhood, and then academics, and then career, and then kind of a free-for-all. And there will also be some time for Q&A. Yeah, I wanted to start at the beginning. So tell us, where are you from? Tell us about where you grew up.
I was born in the Bronx, New York City.
Okay.
Before World War II ended.
And what do you remember? What was the Bronx like in 1940s?
It was interesting. We played stickball on the side streets where we used a broom handle wrapped with electrical tape, and the manhole cover was home plate, and the 47 Chevy was first place, and so forth. And yeah, and we walked to school. A little beyond the school was a pickle store, so nothing but pickles. Pickled cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff like that. And I would often run down there during recess and buy a pickle, which I was not supposed to do. I would bring it back into class, and the teacher would be writing on the board, and I'd take out the pickle, take a bite out of it. The teacher would smell something and look around. That's all I remember.
Were you a rule breaker in general, or was that just an exception for pickle?
Pickles was pretty much it. My other distinctive memory was we lived in the Bronx until I was almost 10, and getting from where we lived in the Bronx to my grandparents, my brother's parents' house in the Bronx, we had to pass the Bronx's Little Italy. And I don't remember at what time. I knew my reading skills left a little bit to be desired, because we would pass this thing of these big neon lights, and I'd see out of the car, and I knew there was something not right, but I was very excited because I kept thinking that the sign said ravioli and pizza, which interested me at the age of 6, I think. It turned out that my reading skills were not much better than they are now. And it turned out to be a movie theater known as the Rivoli Plaza. I was not a good reader then, and I need scholarship to people like you.
So what were you like as a kid?
I was a normal kid. I liked baseball. We were a little political in my house. My parents let me, my brother and me, stay up to watch Nixon's checkers speech, where he claimed, Nixon in 1952, claimed he had a slush fund, right? it was a couple of $1,000 and he was gonna lose his vice presidency candidacy for it. But I would run home in the afternoon and night when I was 10 to watch the Army McCarthy hearings. Because at that age, we knew what McCarthyism was about. It was largely about anti-Semitism. Because in my school, a teacher would disappear once every other month. We would get an announcement over the PA system, Mrs. So-and-so will not be back for the rest of the year, she's ill. Oh, my father, this was the era of neighborhood schools, and not only did the kids go to the school in the neighborhood, the teachers all lived in the neighborhood too. And my father was a podiatrist, and a lot of the teachers were parents. And Mrs. So-and-so was not ill. Mrs. So-and-so could join the ACLU. And they were witch hunts. So we knew what McCarthyism was about. So when McCarthy got raked over the coals by Edward R. Murrow, I was there. I could see it. But otherwise, I was fairly normal, semi-radical.
So in high school, were there, what was high school like? Did you do like extracurricular sports or?
Yeah.
Well,
in my junior or senior year, the school started a fencing team. And we had a neighbor in a place in upstate New York for a couple of summers who I was, what, 11, 10 years old. He taught me how to shoot pole. And he was a serious alcoholic, but he also taught me how to fence.
Right.
And so when my high school started a fencing team, I got to be a jock.
Right.
And they were starting a fencing team from scratch. So the fact that I knew how to hold the weapon was, put me way ahead of everybody else. But then I fenced in college and internationally.
Were you popular in high school? Were you unpopular, or were you kind of in the middle zone of?
The extent to which I was popular was that I largely kept the basketball team from not being able to play basketball because they were flunking geometry, and I was the tutor for the basketball team. So they really liked me. The basketball team really liked me, so I was sort of an unofficial cheerleader. But no, I had a gang. We would get together Saturday nights and invent mathematical systems.
So cool, yeah.
Very, and I was also, not only was I offensive, I had another varsity that was on the math team. We had a cheer. No. Yes. It went something like e to the x dy dx, e to the x dx, sine, cosine, 3.14159, or 2.7183. If Gauss can do it, so can we. Van, you're a math team, compute.
I love that.
And the very sad thing is I remember.
So you started off obviously with an interest in math. Were you interested in philosophy at all before you went to college?
Yes, about 3 months before I went to college. Okay. I was intending to go to college major in mathematics. And what I liked about it was foundation of mathematics and geometry, but particular geometry. And in the summer before my freshman year in college, you have to understand this is a very bizarre story, and I was 16 years old. So you have to this is a 16-year-old dork. I went over to a friend's house named Peter Hoffer. Now I know he's a historian of American history. I think he used to be at Ohio State. And I said, I've read everything in my parents' house, including the stuff that they hide, that they didn't want me to read. Like the National Geographics with the naked ladies from Africa. Right. Yeah, I read those. I found them. What do you have to read? And he literally blindfolded me and pushed me in the direction of a bookcase he had. And the understanding is, whatever I landed on, if I hadn't already read it, that's what I would read. wonder what the late fee is on a 61-year-old. Because this is it. I landed on Dialogues of Plato.
This is the very book.
This is the very one. That's why I'm wondering about the late fee from his library. I forgot to get it back to him, and I discovered this a couple of weeks ago. I thought I would bring this in as a problem. And I read it. And it was the Apology, the Credo, the Fido, it was a symposium and selections from the Republic. And it blew me away for two reasons. One was really smart. One was really stupid. And it was the really stupid thing that did it. The smart thing was that I really liked geometry. I liked the idea of proving things. And I'm reading here, and Plato's proving things. He's trying to prove things. You know, how to lead a good life, what the nature of the state is, what exists, and so forth. So he was proving things like I was trying to prove things, but he was worried about things that mattered, as opposed to isosceles triangles. So I said, this is really cool. That was the smart thing. It moved me a little bit. What moved me more, I'm absolutely serious about this, what moved me more was in reading this, I thought that I had found an error or two. And so I reasoned, as any good 16-year-old would. Socrates is a great and famous philosopher. I found mistakes in Plato. Therefore, I must be a better philosopher than Plato. And literally, that was the end of it. I immediately went to my father and I said, I'm going to be a philosopher. It's more or less when he had his first heart attack. And we had this horrible argument that lasted quite some time until my mother came into the room and said to my father, do you want him to be rich? Or do you want him to be happy? It ended the discussion.
Also, a
Now,
great
here
lesson
were
from
three
Plato's
people.
Republic. Also a great lesson from Plato's Republic.
And here were three people. And it didn't occur to any one of us that I might do both. So I decided to take a vow of poverty. And my father, well, he didn't learn to live with it actually. Until the day I got tenure, he was willing to help me pay my way through law school and do something respectable.
So where did you go to school for undergrad?
I went to Cornell. I did a summer course. Once I decided I got to be a philosopher, I did a summer course at New York University. It was an intro to philosophy class with 89 students from Brooklyn College, one student from NYU, and this high school graduate. I think it was taught by an Ayn Randian. And it was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen. The course was just really dreadful. Thankfully, or not, I had read this before, so I knew that subject had to be better than that class. So it didn't discourage me. If I hadn't read it and taken that class off just on a whim, I would be a failed mathematician by now. Because I wasn't that good at it. I think I'm better at philosophy.
And so tell me about, you went straight into a philosophy major.
Yeah.
I take it.
Well, actually, no, I had a scholarship at Cornell that required that I major in mathematics. Because it was a New York State had these region scholarships. One was a general scholarship, and one was a science, engineering, and mathematics scholarship. And the difference for the maximum amount you could get was $100. So that the science, engineering, mathematics scholarship paid $100 more than the regular scholarship. And in my family, that was a deal breaker. It was either get that scholarship and the extra 100 or go to Queens College, which was 3 miles down the block, and go to college with the same people you went to high school with. So yeah, so I went there with the intention of majoring in mathematics because to keep the scholarship, and I went to see the math advisor and I said, my freshman year, here's what I'm really interested in mathematics. I'm interested in number theory, geometry. And he said, good, here's what you'll do. Freshman year, you'll take calculus. Second year, you'll take differential equations. Junior year, you'll take advanced calculus, then come back and talk to me. Then I whispered, bite me, and walked over to the philosophy part. And started taking philosophy classes in my second semester. but at the end of my sophomore year, I had to give up the scholarship for mathematics because I couldn't do both. And happily enough, Cornell was generous enough to make up the difference between what we could afford and the scholarship I gave them.
Did you have any especially memorable courses or instructors in your undergrad?
I took classes with Norman Malcolm, who was Wittgenstein's major student, who spoke and walked and talked and pitched like Wittgenstein, and it was really horrible. Well, Wittgenstein still is novel investigation, so bedtime reading, right? For every class at the time. Malcolm was fierce. I remember in my sophomore year, I registered for his philosophy psychology class. And he went through the usual thing the first day, and it's about 40 or 50 people in the class. He said, how many graduate students are there? And there were hands. And then philosophy, yes, psychology. How many senior majors in philosophy, senior majors in psych, junior majors? And as an afterthought, he said, there are no sophomores in here, are there? I went like that. And he stared at me and he said, you don't want to have to understand, I'm still 18 years old and a jerk. And so I looked at my little computer printout and I said, this is philosophy 333, philosophy psychology, and you're Professor Malcolm, and this is room 276, Goldsmith Hall. And he said, yeah. I said, then I guess I want to be here. And the only really, really clever thing Malcolm ever said in my face was, well, let's put it this way. By the end of the semester, you won't want to have been here.
Backing up just a moment. So you started college at a relatively early age. Was that because you skipped a grade?
I skipped 8th grade.
Okay.
In New York City, there was a way to skip 8th grade, and I was born late in the year.
Got it.
So yeah, I was 16 when I started, which is terrible. I mean, it was good to skip most of junior high school because all you learned they had to do there was throw a knife. I picked up a little. But yeah, but I was taught, I mean, it was a wonderful faculty. Norman Malcolm, Frank Sibley, Max Black, Sidney Shoemaker, who just died, Zeno Ventler, David Sachs, Platonist. And it's really, really good people. And Keith Donnellan. Well, he was Keith Donnellan there when he moved to UCLA. He went back to the real pronunciation, he was Donnellan. So you could always tell with Keith Donnellan who he knew when, because if you called him Donnellan, you knew him before 1967. If he was Donnellan, it was after 67. It was a wonderful part. Sure what I learned. Well, I learned stuff that I needed to unlearn when I went to graduate school, and it helped me to unlearn it because now I can figure out what it was that I learned as an undergraduate that I can now use, that now fits in with how I see philosophy. But I was very close in my senior year to just giving it up because, well, according to basically the philosophy that we were being taught by most of the people there, the job of philosophy is to rid the world of philosophy. It was sort of, here's my view. Most people think that Wittgenstein's later work is a repudiation of the so-called logical positivism of his earlier work. My view is it is not a repudiation. It's just logical positivism without the logic. Right? And the positivist idea was there's no such thing as philosophy. The job of philosophy is just to rid the world of it by saying, if you try to say something metaphysical or moral or whatever, it's all nonsense because it's unverifiable, just positivistic crack, right? And I got very good at doing this. Give me a theory, I'll refute it. Because there are no true theories. There really aren't any theories. And it began to get a little frustrating. But it get frustrated enough not to apply to graduate school. So when I had to choose between going to University of Michigan and Stanford, Nelson Pike, my favorite teachers at Cornell said, go find out who the best person is at Michigan and read. Go find out who the best person is at Stanford and read. You'll know. So I read something by Bill Alston at Michigan. And what he was doing was more or less what I was doing at Cornell, but he was doing it better. And then I read Donald Davidson's Actions, Reasons, and Causes. And that was the end. Because he completely refuted something that was jammed down my throat almost daily at Cornell, that reasons can't be causes because reasons are logically connected to what they're reasons for, and causes are logically independent of their effects. 3 lines later, Davidson just absolutely refutes it. But he's not just refuting theories. Buried in there, there was productive metaphysical work in the theory of action being done. I said, I gotta do that. And then there was also the choice between snow and palm trees. Also a motivating factor, but it was Davidson that was decisive.
So you went to Stanford. Was Davidson your advisor?
Well, here's what everybody here, you're all good philosophy majors and stuff. You believe in the post hoc fallacy? Well, I don't. Here's why. I passed my prelims on a Monday. I got notified. On Tuesday, I asked Donald Davidson to be my thesis advisor. And on Thursday, he said, oh, I'm leaving for Princeton. And he didn't ask me to come. Post hoc care for Proctor. I chased him out of Palo Alto to Princeton.
Did you get to take courses with him before?
Yeah, I had courses in theory of meaning and philosophy of language, and a course on the theory of action. And so I did my. So he left before my second when my second year was over. So Jaco Hintica basically took over all of Davidson's students. So I wrote a dissertation on Davidson topic with Jaco Hintica. How they passed me on different.
What was Stanford like at that time?
Stanford was really interesting. There were really good historians. John Goheen wrote a wonderful monograph on St. Thomas Aquinas, but also taught ancient philosophy. And there was Pat Suppies in the philosophy of science. Donald Davidson basically did everything. Hintica came, and then from Norway, Norway's only Catholic. He does stuff on phenomenology too. Dr. Foley. Yeah, he taught modal logic and phenomenology, not in the same course. It was worse. I mean, everybody has the stereotype of the Scandinavian sing-song accent. He had it. And getting modal logic that way, just, yes, okay. But it was very exciting stuff there. They had just started their program in logic and philosophy of science. So the graduate students sort of split apart. Bob Tateev, who came with me from Stanford to Wayne, was in the logic and philosophy of science program. It was very exciting. We got the standard undergraduate taught by the then chair, who was Donald Davidson. Just there were about 25 of us in the first year class. And he said, look to the left, you look to the right of you. 5 of you may get degrees from here or somewhere. And we looked around and we decided who they were. And we were right. We got it right first. We knew who was going to get their degree.
What did you write your dissertation on?
Semantics of quotation.
Interesting.
No. I was mocked by that by a high school teacher who taught geology. And my only response was, and what rock did you write your thesis on? It's what I regarded at the time is, here's my thing about dissertations. Dissertations are hoops, right? I don't actually believe in them, right? Because I mean, there's truth, right? Wisdom coming from age. There's some truth to the idea that wisdom comes with age. I mean, the history of intellectual thought, I think, bears us out. The mathematicians and the musicians mature very young. If a mathematician has a beta by 23, he should just go and sell insurance. Social scientists mature a little later, the natural science, the physicists later, early, and the philosophers late. We're asking somebody in their 20s and early 30s to write a 250-page dissertation and have good ideas. Now, my view is that a good journal article is about 25 pages long and has a really good idea in it. Average dissertation, average book in philosophy is 250 pages. Should have 10 good ideas. The average good philosopher has 3 good ideas in their entire careers. Why are we writing dissertations at early stages? I think it's nuts. I picked a topic that I thought was completable. I picked a topic that here's a question in the philosophy of language and semantics. I was writing on the semantics of natural languages. Here's a topic where I think I already know the answer, and it's completable. Let I find out at a time, because hardly anybody ever wrote about it. 9 years later, I finished. Well, that was 6.
At what point in your career then did you get especially interested in like events and space and time and all those topics?
Well, the problem was with the dissertation, which I was writing while I was here teaching, was that, and it's happened again, as soon as I thought I knew what the solution was, I lost interest in the topic. Because I knew what the answer was. Let's move on. Oh, now I have to write it down. Okay. So I started to get interested in other things that Davidson was worried about. I was a Davidson student, which was the theory of action, which was really what motivated me towards Stanford in the first place, is stuff on the theory of action. And again, I did a very trivializing little maneuver, because I figured out, because I'm really interested in the theory of action. What's a human action? Well, I figured that out instantaneously. A human action is the bringing about of an event. So there are only 2 problems in the theory of action. What's a bringing about, and what's an event? 15 minutes will convince you that the problem of what's a bringing about is monstrously difficult. So I picked the other one. I got interested in events, and I just started writing stuff. And partly because when I first came here, 5 people were hired that first year with me, because the department had emptied out. And Gail Stein had come, and she was really the philosopher of language that was hired. I don't know why I was hired as a philosopher of language. And she came to me with a problem that she was working on with respect to Paul Grice's stuff in language. And the more I thought about the little problems she was working about, it was really a problem about the nature of the relationship between means and ends. I mean, there are lots of cases of means and ends. Throw a rock as a means of getting the window broken, which is one kind of means ends, causal. But then I buy the last volume of the encyclopedia, and so my buying the last volume is a means to completing the set. Well, there it's identity. Well, so I wrote a little thing for her about means ends relationships, which helped her solve a problem that she was having with Grice's theory of meaning. That's how I got my first publication, because I had a mentor here, and we joined up. But then the more I started to think about means end stuff, the more I started to think just straight means ends and events, and that's how I got into the event stuff.
What was the process like of getting the job here?
Absurd. I'm sorry, I am a model for nothing in the business profession. Brad Angel was brought in as chair of the department in 1967. He was presiding over a sinking ship because everybody was leaving. When I got here, the only people who had been there at least more than 6 months was basically Larry Powers and a cellist and somebody who did philosophy of art, Ray Huckster. Everybody else had left. So Brad Angel needed to hire an apartment. So apparently one day he got on a plane, drove and flew to California to San Diego, rented a car, and literally drove up the coast. And every night before he got to a university in California, he would call up the graduate advisor and say, I'm hiring. You have anybody who wants to get interviewed? So the chair at the time, David Mivison, calls me up. It's like 10 o'clock at night. He said, want to get interviewed by this guy from Wayne State? I said, sure. So I had this interview. I hear nothing from him for months. And I have another interview at Miami of Ohio. And so I call up Brad Angel and I say, I haven't heard from you well, but I have another interview in Oxford, Ohio. You want me to stop by and read a paper? And he said, so Miami of Ohio is paying your plane fare and you're going to stay with your brother overnight because my brother was teaching in the law school here. So all we have to do is buy you dinner. Sure, come read some paper. And then I had this knockdown, drag out fight with Larry Powers during the paper, interrupted by Hector Castaneda interrupting me and saying, no, I want to talk about this. And I get 2 sentences in responding to Castaneda, and Powers said, no, let's talk about this. And I got the job because I did Wayne State philosophy. I engaged the argument. I mean, that's apparent. I mean, Powers finally admitted to me 2 years in that he was wrong and I was right. But I didn't just say, I'm right, you're wrong. I engaged his argument and refuted it to my satisfaction. He engaged my argument, completely misunderstood it, and said, but we were arguing philosophy. That's the Wayne State way. And that's how I got the job.
What was Wayne State like at that time?
It was almost like a kid's party because 5 of us were hired. Brad Angel was sort of overseeing this toddler's role. We hired Bill Stein, Gail Stein, now deceased, Bob Baker, who did ethics. He's now at Union College, but has been there since he didn't get tenure. Bob Tateev, who retired early. And then the following year, we hired Barbara Humphries. Some of us had a year or 2 teaching experience. And then there was me, a kid out of graduate school who had no teaching experience at all.
How old were you when you got the job?
24. And I read a paper that ended up being 1/3 of 1 chapter of my dissertation, because that's all I had, because that's what the job done. Do not try this at home.
The job market has changed.
The job market has changed. The job market has changed. But I engaged, and Powers like that. But we were inventing this. We were reinventing philosophy at Wayne State, because before us there was Slay and Edmund Gettier and Nikian and Castaneda, major stars that all left, and we were just sort of inventing the department, and it was exciting because we were in charge of everything. I mean, I was immediately in charge of the undergraduate program. And then I noticed that, for example, that intro to philosophy was numbered 201. Every other intro class at Wayne State was numbered 101. So I undertook the project of lowering all the numbers. And then it turned out I noticed that philosophy was listed among the social sciences. And I thought this was an outrage. We're humanity. So I bullied the department of basically my elders by a year and a half, right? and persuaded the college to rename, to put us in the humanities. Whereupon our enrollment dropped about 40%. Nobody wanted it. And we were fighting to get our enrollment back. It's all my fault. We were really just reinventing Wayne State philosophy, trying to carry on this tradition started by Flanagan, Castanedas, and Slay, and Gettier. And it was like some of them knew what they were doing. And I was there for a long time. I mean, I taught Descartes to Hume, right? I was, you're now going to have your first heart attack. Until we hired an actual ancient philosopher, I taught ancient philosophy. Horrifying, isn't it? You're allowed to. Right? We were just reinventing everything. So in a way, it was fun. And the dean at the time was very, very good to us. He knew we were all a bunch of kids. I mean, I was the youngest of all the kids, but we were all under 30. What he did was he started to give us money for the fall. We were in the quarter system, and in the fall quarter and in the spring quarter, he gave us $1,000. And what we did with this $1,000, you could do that for $1,000. We brought in a major philosopher for a week. Dinners, gave 3 public lectures, came to our classes, we had parties, transportation, hotel, everything was paid for with $1,000. And we had Sellers, we had Kripke, we had Quine, we had Chisholm, we had every major figure in middle 20th century philosophy. And we learned a lot of stuff, and it sort of helped build our reputation. It was absolutely invaluable to me, because again, weird stuff happens. One of the last people we had was David Kaplan, the logician philosopher of language. And we were having lunch, and I was about to excuse myself because I had to go teach a class in the theory of action. And the problem was that I was wondering whether 2 or more actions or events can occur in the same place at the same time. But I had been racking my brain about that problem for months, made no headway with it at all. I was about to go to class to explain what the problem was and then dismiss them. Kaplan said, "That's an interesting problem, let's go." And he invited himself to my class. I laid out the problem. I was about to go, and he said, "I have an idea." And he had an idea, which I refuted. And that gave me an idea, and I expressed it, and he refuted it. And we did this back and forth for about a while, about 2 hours. And finally, I said, "What's going on is, here's something weird going on." Because when my first idea was from a certain perspective, and his refutation of that idea was from a different perspective. His idea was from that perspective. But then it was almost unconsciously, we switched places. And I began to wonder, why was that so easy? Why was it so easy to switch places so that on the one hand, I could easily argue that 2 events couldn't occur in the same place at the same time, and he could refute that. And then I could just as easily argue that innumerably many events can occur in the same place at the same time, and he could refute that. And when I finally worked out why that was so easy to switch positions, I had the central concept of what ended up being my book. Thank you, David Kaplan.
What was the writing of the book like?
The writing was sort of interesting.
Events, a metaphysical study?
Yeah. The title is an homage to Roger Chisholm, who wrote Person and Object of Metaphysics. let me tell that story first. My first public presentation in philosophy was a short paper that I couldn't get published anywhere. I was sending it all over the place. And then I read that, and it was about a dispute between Chisholm and Davidson on the identity of events. And then I read in one of the journals that there was going to be in Illinois, Bloomington, Illinois, the 18th annual Illinois Philosophy Conference, honoring the work of Roger Chisholm. So I submitted the paper and they accepted it. So I go there. Now this is like 1974. It's my first public presentation. And apart from an occasional APA meetings, I've never seen philosophy done in public. Here's what I discovered when I walked into the room. All the sessions are plenary. There are 120 people there, and everyone's going to every session. Second, Chisholm's going to be there. And he was sitting in the first row listening to every paper, making notes, because he'd already seen all the papers, and he was going to comment on them at the end. Third,
That's horrifying.
I'm sorry.
That's horrifying.
Oh, it gets worse. Everybody who gets up there, these are major people, Miles Brand, Peter Van Inwagen. I mean, everybody who's anybody who knows about this stuff was there. And everybody there has a 25, 30-page, hour-long paper to read, preceded by a 10-minute oration on how great Roger Chisholm is. And then they proceed to trash this people. And I have a 9-page APA length paper that says, here's this dispute, Davidson got it right, Chisholm got it wrong, because he commits a scope fallacy. Wayne State philosophy, it's all about scope fallacies. And I would try to write, while listening to these other papers, I'd try to write, an introduction, but I'm not very good at it. So eventually I decided, I'm just going to go read my paper, my 9-page paper, and be done with it. And on my way up, thankfully, I was one of the last people to read a paper before he responded to everything. On my way up this, I got to say something. Here's a very good piece of advice. Don't do that. I said, I've got a PhD. It's very new, but I have a PhD. I should be able to think of something. So I said the first thing that came into my head. And the first thing that came into my head was 20 people, Chisholm's in the first row. The history of progress in philosophy is not the history of the discovery of important truths from which we learn. It's the making of interesting errors from which we learn. I had no follow-up. So I said the next thing that came into my head. And I said, from that point of view, Roger Chisholm has to be numbered among the great philosophers of all time. Okay, that I would have been happy with. I got dead silence. Really, it was just 120 people. You could hear your career drop. The silence. I don't know how long it lasted. You know what dead air sounds like on the radio? It sounded like forever. It must have been maybe 15, 20 seconds, which is long enough. The silence was broken. This is literally true. Roger Chisholm fell off his chair in hysterics. He thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. I think because he thought what I was doing was mocking everybody else's orations before they trashed him. I don't know. Two reasons why that book has that title. First of all, he proceeded to write me just absolutely spectacular letters for promotion and tenure and promotion of associate, promotion of full, with things like, I always look forward to seeing what he's going to write. Okay. The second reason was that a number of years later, a lot of years later, there was a group, I was alone in the philosophy department, not in this building, in another one, alone on a Friday afternoon when a group called up from the basement of the science library. It's called Recording for the Blind. And they recorded books academic books for blind students. But they didn't do it just to have a library of it. They did it on request. And they were preparing a book to be read. And there's a lot of preparation involved in getting a book ready to be read so that it could go on tape for a blind person. But there was some symbols they couldn't understand, and it was a philosophy book. can I help? Well, they described the symbol and I am visually impaired. So I said, I'm going to come over. It was equals by definition, equals DF. And it was Chisholm's own person object of metaphysical study. So I deciphered the symbol. The lady looked at me and said, your SSRN symbol, get in the box, get in the booth. They did a test. I passed the test and they recruited me to read Chisholm's person and object for a blind student who happened at the time to be, I found out later was a student at Chisholm's. I insisted that Chisholm never know that. No, for a very good reason. I'm not a major fan of the so-called New Testament, but one thing that's in that I've always in there, it says when you pray, pray in silence. Pray, go in a closet. Yeah, I have that view about charity. When I give anonymously, unless I have to write a check. But I don't get on any lists. Right. This was a gift to Roger Chisholm and his student, and it had to be anonymous. But that's why the book has that title.
A side question. Is this your writing?
No.
Okay.
Let me see.
That's good.
Oh God, no.
It's an underlining style that I can only describe as unhinged.
Oh, I know. That must be Jerry Powers. I think he notates books like that.
It's wild. Have a look after this. If Kirsty were here, she would cringe with me. Anyway,
I happen to have a copy of this book. Comes on. But you say notes. This book went out of print very early on, and then I found and a student here when I was about to give a seminar said they found this book not too expensive on Amazon, or eBay or Amazon, right? And they got it, and it was inscribed. And I said, "Gee, I'd like to see it." It was inscribed by me because it was the copy I had given to what are now my ex-in-laws. They couldn't wait to get rid of it.
Okay, I have a few random questions, so these should be just.
But how did the right book?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So the book got written for basically the following reason. I was walking the streets with Alex Rosenberg, Foster of Social Science. This was in the early 80s. And we walked the streets of New York, and he said, you know, you really ought to write that book. And I said, A, what book it be? Why? And he said, you've been publishing stuff on events. And eventually, some clever graduate student somewhere, not necessarily at Wayne, but somewhere is going to read that, figure out what the theory is, and you're going to spend the rest of your career claiming that it was really yours. So I wrote the book out of vanity.
Great reason.
And first I said, what theory? So I gave myself 6 months. Every morning, cleared off the table, took out a pad, and I wrote a first draft of the book, missing a couple of chapters. At the end of the 6 months, I realized Alex was right. There was a theory there. It's great. And then I had to finish it. But it was vanity, I think.
So some quick questions, and then we'll have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Who's your favorite philosopher of all time?
All time?
Yeah.
Aristotle.
Okay. Who's the most overrated philosopher?
Oh, that's hard. That's really hard. There was a joke that used to be told about Norman Dalton, and it went like this. Here's a proof, right, that there are an infinite number. Here's a proof and a refutation of the proof. The proof is a proof that there are an infinite number of flaws. For every flaw, here's the proof. For every philosopher, there's one stupider. Refutation. Norman Malcolm. I sat in an APA meeting once listening to a couple of, they must have been advanced graduate students, I don't know. But they were looking about, they were talking about Malcolm's book on dreaming. And he said, and this was their interpretation of the book, that Malcolm had finally seen the absurdity of the later philosophy of Wittgenstein and wrote dreaming as a reductio. Okay. Malcolm has written some really good stuff. His paper on Descartes, I think, is brilliant. On Descartes' transition from I think, therefore I am a thinking being. That may be the best thing he ever did. And he's known for everything else and not that piece. I don't know who most of them.
All right.
Yeah.
We can pass. Do you have a favorite book that's not a philosophy book? We can talk about that.
For reasons that have to skip obvious problems in the major fan of Woody Allen.
That's the appropriate way to express fandom.
Yeah. Yeah, and Midnight in Paris is.
Is that even you go there regularly? Is that your favorite city in the world?
Yeah.
What do you love about it?
Every place is historic. The people there seem to care. Also a moderate food, so food is wonderful. One of the most wonderful experiences I had in Paris, it was in a summer trip, and we went to the Luxembourg Gardens, big stretch of greenery, and it was filled with young adults and teenagers stretched out on blankets, reading. They weren't on their phones. They weren't, texting each other. They were in little groups reading and then talking to each other. It absolutely blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. And Paris is just Paris.
We only have a few minutes, so let's say, does anyone present here in the room have any questions? If you're in the Zoom, you're also welcome to post a question in the chat. Yeah. You can just speak.
Cool. Having taught young people for so long, what would be a concept of philosophy, and I'm going to use a really large term on that, concept of philosophy that you think would be helpful to very young students? And I'm talking like elementary. So
You mean
it's like
like
nugget.
9-year-olds?
What's that?
You mean like
9,
5?
10, 10-year-olds. What would be something that if you could have as your college students who already have this nugget, what would that nugget be?
I think it's the idea. It's one of the things that I discovered when I first read Plato, because I used to think we all have philosophical thoughts about God, about space, or this, or whatever. They're philosophical. And what I discovered when I read Plato was that rational people can discuss these issues rationally. It's not a matter of here's what I believe. Well, I think that's stupid. Here's what I believe. It's oh, you believe that? That's really interesting. Why? And I don't, when I say that, this is why I don't get along in parties very well, because I say, why do you believe that? And people take that as a hostile remark. I mean, hey, if you got a good reason for that, maybe I should believe that too. And I think that's really important to tell students of any age. I know a lot of philosophy gets taught in elementary and high schools, and they're often taught relativistically because we don't want to say, oh, you got that wrong. I think it's okay to get things wrong. because I think it's okay to be me, and I get that wrong a lot, right? But that, oh, here's a reason. And the reasons are accessible and you can see them and you can see whether it's a good one. It takes training, but yeah. I think that's so important to teach children, that what's true is usually believable because there's a reason for thinking that it's true. It's not, this is what I grew up with, or is what my favorite rock star thinks, or whatever. It's, oh, there's a reason. Yeah.
Eric, or Sean.
Did Aristotle help you write your events book?
Yes.
I know. I thought it'd be a good story.
No,
The problem.
part of the thing that emerged from my discussion with David Kaplan is connected to this. I was teaching Greek philosophy at the time. I think may have been the first time I was, one of the first times I was teaching it. I'm trying to, what can I teach? I'm flipping through it first on. And I'm flipping through the physics. And I come across this paragraph, and it says, for nothing nothing goes from being musical to being white, right? Unless the musical is an accompaniment of the non-white or the black, or the other way around. So it is clear that our principles must be contraries. And I've been struggling for a while to get a real grip on the concept of change. And so struggle. Oh, why don't you read Aristotle first? Then you don't have to struggle so hard. Oh, to change is to first have one property and then have a contrary property. Okay. And that, together with what emerged from my discussion with Kaplan, was that you could bundle properties together that are contraries. So the color properties are contraries. The shape properties are contraries. So nothing can go from being red to being square. If you're going to go from red to being something, it's red to being blue, or rectangular to being round. And that was really the solution to the problem of why Kaplan and I kept being able to agree and disagree about how many events could take place at the same place at the same time. Because if I've got a separate bunch of contraries of temperature, say temperature, and another bunch of contrary location properties, well, then if the thing gets warmer and moves, that's two changes. If, for example, horizontal movements were due to pushes and pulls, but vertical movements were due to the will of God, we might want to say that a diagonal movement is really two separate movements brought together. But if you don't think of the horizontal and vertical as different dimensions, as different kinds of qualities, then the diagonal movement has a horizontal aspect. Rather than being a horizontal movement and a vertical movement, it's a diagonal movement with different properties. So reading Aristotle taught me how to get the contraries right, and battling David Kaplan taught me how to sort the contraries into quality spaces. And then the rest of the book just wrote itself. More or less.
Eric, is there anything in the chat that, okay. Yeah, Graham, maybe last question and then we'll.
So I think it's cool that apparently you're just well known around campus, even outside of the department. And I know we've been fortunate enough to have people that are in different departments be well known in our own and interact with them. What sort of like, do you have other like favorite departments to hang out with, or professors or students or just campus areas?
It's not favorite department. I like the English department. I get to rag on them for being posted on it.
I no longer think it's cool.
But best friend outside the department is the class assistant. So, yeah, so I like classics. And I'm a big, my wife's a Spanish teacher and learning French and so forth. So I'm a big defender of foreign languages, which are and have been at Wayne State for a long time under attack. I like fighting from a position of weakness, which I have been doing my entire career here. But hey, I lose, but I feel really good for having tried. I don't know what I would do with a real solid victory on this.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Larry, for joining us and for sharing all your stories. And
And now I can retire because everybody now knows all my stories. Copies of my book are on sale in the Lombard.
Was it 84 that it came out?
86. Yeah. I still.
Your middle name is Brian. Apparently.
Yeah. For a while, I could not. For a while, I could not decide how I wanted to sign my articles. My first one was with Gail Stein. So that was easy because this was in the early 70s and women were still having problems. So it was G.C. Stein and L.B. Lombard. But then I decided, am I going to be L.B. Lombard? Am I going to be L. Brian Lombard, Lawrence Brian Lombard? And then I made the mistake of doing all three. Lawrence P. will be fine.
did you stick with the full 3 names?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, almost everything I've written since is Lawrence P. I still have movie rights. I do have movie rights. When the movie comes out, I'm getting Diane Lane to play Change. It was, really, the process was awful. I mean, because while I was actually writing the book, Routledge and Keegan Paul, which is a very prestigious press. I mean, Wittgenstein's Tractatus is in that series. The company changed hands 3 times. So it never appeared at an APA book exhibit. It was never an author meets critics. I saw one advertisement for the book in an issue of the New York Review of Books.
The New York Review.
So it was not a great experience, although recently, within the last couple of years, Routledge has decided to reissue some of their classics. And they reissued this in hardback a couple of years ago. And then last year, it's now come out in paperback. They would not let me make any changes, though, because there are typos that I'm moderately embarrassed about. And there's a fallacy in a footnote. And I leave it to you all as an exercise to find it. Because correcting it is the project I'm now working on. That will find out who else is doing this.